Today we're going to be talking about reading comprehension as part of a series. There's the links in the description below to the other videos in the series. This is a GMAT verbal strategy series. So today we're going to be talking about reading comprehension speed and accuracy with a focus on speed, but as we're going to see, speed and accuracy are very closely related. So a lot of the things we're going to talk about today will also help with your reading comprehension accuracy. So let's get started. Okay, so the topic today is reading comprehension, 7 ways to increase your speed in RSA. And what we're going to see is if we can reduce the time we need for each reading comprehension question by a few seconds, right? By a few seconds for each question in 7 different ways, think about how that can add up at the end of the verbal section, and we can significantly improve our speed in GMAT verbal by doing this, right? Okay. So we're going to come up with 7 different ways. They're all going to be effective. They're all going to be easy to understand, and they're going to help your reading comprehension speed and get you to that GMAT verbal section faster, give you more time for critical reasoning, and get you your score. To introduce this, let's talk about 4 things and review 4 things that are key in reading comprehension. One is understanding the passages, right? You have to understand the passage to do reading comprehension because it is reading comprehension. Okay, pretty straightforward. Another part is understanding the questions. We're going to talk about that a little bit and how that can contribute to our speed. We also have to be able to find in the passages the right information for answering the questions, right? And finding information in a passage is key. That's something that takes us time. So we're going to talk about that as well. And finally, there's telling trap choices from correct answers. So notice that these are all 4 our areas of opportunity for improving our speed, right? In understanding the passages, the questions, finding the information, and deciding between what's correct and incorrect. So if there's any aspect of this that we can tweak, we're going to get faster. So let's start by looking at this passage. As you go through this passage and answer this question, I want you to kind of think about what's holding you up, why is it taking a long time, and what you could possibly do to answer it more quickly. I'll give you a few minutes here, and then we'll talk about this. Once you get an answer, you can post it in the chat, and let's see what we can come up with. Got a few answers coming in. Any other ideas? Right? And this takes a little time. Like, what's going on, right? What is it about this question that takes us time? Give you another 15 seconds. Okay, now let's talk about this. So this question is a little tricky, right? We go through, we read the passage, we come to this, and if you're like me, a lot of these answer choices look kind of the same, you know? I mean, they all sound reasonable. They all make sense in the context, most of them make sense in the context of the passage. They all have language from the passage. So what's going on? What takes us a lot of time? And I would submit that the key thing here, and this is the first thing I want to bring up, our first tip, is that this question is hard to answer because the passage is a little bit hard to understand. And we can easily read this passage in kind of a vague way and get the idea, okay, look, I get the idea. There was something about gender ideology and these women were marginalized, right? So maybe they were marginalized by the ideology. It says they were marginalized. It says and then the second paragraph goes on to say that some unions were, in some cases did advance the interest of women, and the women did have some say, right? But we get a vague idea. If you get a vague idea like that, then you go to this question and you go, okay, which of the following can be inferred regarding the gender ideology? Is it about the marginalization? Is it about the voice? Is it about the non-discrimination and inclusion? What's it about? So what takes us so long in the case of this question is if we don't fully understand, if we get a vague idea of what we're reading, then all the answer choices look right. Like, for instance, A, it prevented women from making significant contributions to the establishment of industrial unions. Sounds right, right? It says something about their contributions. So maybe A is right. It resulted from the marginalization of women in industrial unions. I see, if I quickly go to this, it did say something about marginalized, right? So these choices all start looking correct. So what we have to do, one of the key things we're going to do is to get to these passages faster is focus on understanding, right? We really have to understand what's being said. And if it takes a little extra time, it takes a little extra time, right? You're much better off getting the basic idea of the passage, what's really being said, understanding each sentence clearly, and then going to the answers, and then going to the question, right? So what is correct here? The correct answer is indeed C. It had a significant effect on the advancement of women's issues within industrial unions, right? So let's see why these other choices aren't correct. A, it prevented women from making significant contributions. Let's take a look at what it says about, can home in on this keyword, contributions. Okay. So let's see what it says about contributions. It says Foe stresses the importance of contributions, right here, to the development of unions at the community level. So they did make contributions. It didn't keep them from making contributions, okay? It resulted from the marginalization of women. What does it say about marginalization? Argues that women were marginalized right under gender ideology. Women were marginalized by the union bureaucracies, right? That's what it says about marginalized. But it doesn't say because of it doesn't say it resulted from it. It actually seemed to cause it, right? So even though marginalization was involved, it's the cause and effect. We got to get this stuff clear. If you understand it, B is out. Clearly the primary tenets were not non-discrimination and inclusion, and we can't say its effects were mitigated by the growth of the industrial unions. So C is our correct answer, okay? So what we see here, our first takeaway is, for maximum speed, you really have to understand what you're reading. And I know this might sound obvious, but I've seen it so many times. People read the passage and they're kind of bored by it. They don't really understand it, but they're reading it to read. You know what I mean? I even had a student recently started reading the passages like a commentator. Women's issues and the gender ideology have been shown to marginalize. very seriously. You know what I mean? And he really understood the passages. It was uncanny how fast his speed and accuracy improved. It was almost a little scary. I felt as if he was understanding passages that I'd read multiple times better than I understood them. He was seeing things so clearly and so quickly. So one of the things we're going to do for speed is focus on understanding. To get there, you have to be self-aware regarding your degree of understanding. Are you reading it in a boring way? Are you saying, I don't really want to read this? Or are you really reading the sentences to understand them? If you find understanding the passages challenging, develop skill by practicing with a lot of passages on time. Read the passages one sentence at a time if necessary, and make sure, do I really understand what I'm reading or not? Okay. And the funny thing is, this last point, in many cases, better understanding can be accomplished with just a change in mentality. Okay. I've seen it many times. I have a student come to me having a hard time understanding the passages. And I just say, look, you got to understand the passages. And the person says, okay, changes that mentality. Instead of reading them to look for facts and, basically some disjointed words, they read the passage to understand. And suddenly their RC speed and accuracy improves measurably right away from a change in mentality. So it may be that all you need to really get a way different performance in RC is to change your mentality and say, look, I have to understand these passages, not just read to read. Okay. So let's go on to another one. And let's think about in this next case, once again, what is taking time? What can we possibly do to tweak it? We know now that we need to understand, truly understand what we're reading. But what else is going on in this passage that maybe we could do to speed ourselves up? Once again, when you get your answer, you could let me know by posting in the chat so we know that your people are getting through this. Okay, we have a few different answers here. Let's see what's going on. So what is challenging about this one? I think this passage is at least illustrates something interesting. It has a lot of facts, right? It's also a long passage. So one of the key things we're going to do as we read a passage is we're going to create, how are we going to get through this fast, right? Because we see Bakker, we see Riclet, we see Chinsami, we see dinosaurs, we see warm-blooded, cold-blooded, lamellar. Okay, so how are we going to handle this? One of the first things we're going to do, and this is is key. As you go through the passage, we said you want to read for understanding. You want to read for basic understanding of what's going on for sure. The other thing, second thing we're going to do is read a passage. We're going to create a mental map of the passage. You could do this with some notes. You don't want to take too many notes. We're going to talk about that more in a bit. But you definitely want to have a mental map of the passage. For instance, in this case, we have the first paragraph. We noticed that the whole first paragraph is talking about this introducing whether the dinosaurs are warm-blooded or cold-blooded, that there's a debate going on. It's talking about the different types of bone, the vascularization, and some of the conclusions toward the end that people came to. They just, many paleontologists have come to believe that dinosaur and bone to be mammalian-like, right? Then we see the second paragraph. It talks about this contention about being mammalian-like or warm-bloodedness being questioned. We need to notice that. We need to see Chinsami. Okay, we're going to pick up and make a mental map of the passage. And this is going to help so much because someone was just asking, should we read the question stem before we go to the passage? And the answer is no. Okay, why? Because we need a mental map of the whole passage. Okay, so basically, if you read the question stem of the first question before you go to the passage, you're not going to create this mental map. You're going to be distracted by this one thing. And of course, this one is about Riclet's position, about dinosaur physiology. Well, we see that in the end of the first paragraph. Great. So we could totally figure that out before we go to the passage. I mean, that's what it's about. We'd focus on the second part, but what we really want to be prepared for, we want to set ourselves up to answer these 3 or 4 questions associated with the passage quickly. How are we going to do that? With a mental map. Okay, so you want to have the passage mapped out in your mind. What does each paragraph do? What's the purpose of it? And also, where are these details? If I see Bakker, it's in the first paragraph and it's in the top of the second paragraph. I see Chinsami, it's only in the second paragraph, right? I want to know where to find this. Now, we may have to read up or down once we find this. Like if we see this part about Riclet, we may have to read up or down to find more. We're not going to just stick with that one line because that's where it is, but that's going to be our starting point to find our information. So a mental map is key for getting through the passage fast. Let's go to this question. The author of the passage would be most likely to agree with Riclet's position regarding claims about dinosaur physiology was, right? So now we have to find the claim. Now I see Riclet mentioned a couple of times here, right? It's up here and then a second time over here. Okay, so which one is the position? We know where this is in the mental map. It's in these 2 spots. It says, although de Riclet urged caution, right? Urged caution, arguing for an intermediate type of dinosaur physiology. So that's the position. The first, these characteristics were documented, is not a position. It's just a document. He found highly vascularized. That's not the position. The position is a position of caution. So we have to be clear about that. So let's see. So unjustified by the evidence available to de Riclet. Was it unjustified? Let's take a look. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is go back to the passage, right? Let's look for, was it justified or not? So this position was urging caution. We know that the second paragraph says that this contention that dinosaur bones were like mammalian and warm-bloodedness were questioned, right? So actually it was not. There's our failure point. It wasn't unjustified. The evidence actually kind of backed it up. A is out. Proven incorrect. B, proven incorrect by work done by Bakker and his followers. Was it proven incorrect? Was it proven incorrect that they should be cautious and argue for an intermediate type of dinosaur physiology? Was that proven incorrect by Bakker? Well, Bakker was certainly against it, had a different position, but was it proven incorrect? Not really. and certainly not by followers. So there's our failure point for B. Indicative of the prevailing scientific at the time opinion at the time. Was Dirichlet's position that there should be an intermediate type of dinosaur physiology going against indicative of the prevailing scientific opinion at the time? It says, although Reclay urged that. So no, it wasn't. There's our failure point. It was not indicative of the prevailing scientific opinion, if we found that. Right here, as paleontologists come to believe the dinosaur bone to be mammalian-like, although Reclay urged caution, so it was not indicative of the prevailing scientific opinion. Warranted given certain subsequent findings. What was caution warranted? Should there be an intermediate type? Well, the whole second paragraph basically supports that. So D is looking pretty good. And then it says influential in the work of Chinsami. Okay. Well, we've made our mental map. We can go down and find Chinsami, right? Recently, Chinsami investigated bones of dinosaurs. Her work, and it mentions her work, and it mentions a couple things that came from it. It doesn't say anything about Reclay influencing that work, right? So E is out. Our correct answer is D. And having that mental map, knowing where to find Chinsami, knowing where to find Dirichlet, knowing where to find Bakker, all these things add up to getting through this quickly. So this is and using those failure points, right? Once we have our mental map and we know where to look, find those failure points and bang through this thing. You can get through some answers pretty quickly by finding failure points. Proven incorrect is very strong language. Is it proven incorrect or not? It's not a proven incorrect. Failure point, out. Influential in the work of Chinsami. Get rid of it. Doesn't say that. These are all key failure points. Warranted given the subsequent findings. Well, it does mention subsequent findings. And here's where understanding the passage comes in. If we understand what the second part is about, that it's basically backing up this caution, then we bang this thing out and we're done with this question, okay? So to set ourselves up to answer the reading comprehension quickly, make a mental map of the passage, noting where the different information is presented, and learn to use this mental map along with the keywords to find the information you need. This passage is only 2 paragraphs long. In a 3-paragraph passage, it becomes even more important. And notice this, some of the keywords are easier to find than others, like Dirichlet, easy to find. If it says 1960, easy to find, right? Names are easy to find. Dates are easy to find. Capitalized words are easy to find. Certain long words are easy to find. So knowing how to look for these keywords is really key, and you crank through, find the information, and get the questions done fast, okay? Another thing we saw is this key thing with failure points, right? Learning to precisely compare answer choices with what the passage says to identify failure points is key. I wrote like a whole reading comprehension course. I know so many little different things about reading comprehension, but I swear I used to be afraid of reading comprehension almost anyway. And then I really started focusing on failure points and saying, the really key thing here is to find a way these answer choices are wrong. And now I crank. I can look through, 9 out of 10 or maybe 19 out of 20 reading comp questions. I can crank. Why? Because I can find failure points. I go, no, it just doesn't say that. You know what I mean? You do that for 4 answers. You get to the last one, and you're done with this thing because you can find failure points so quickly. And this works for all types of reading comp questions. Like, no, it just doesn't say that. It does not say that. You know what I mean? And this is where understanding is key, though, because if you're not understanding, you're thinking, well, maybe it does say that. So understanding is key. Then once you totally understand what you're reading, you find those failure points and you crank through this passage, right? And sometimes you have to work from the worst answer choice to the best. It's the only way. Some of the choices you're like, well, these are looking pretty good. So keep those last 2, maybe even last 3. But in this one, for instance, we know that it wasn't influential in the work of Chinsami. We can get rid of that so quickly. Proven incorrect. It definitely wasn't proven incorrect. Then we have these other choices that are a little slower to get rid of. But with our understanding the passage, we can quickly find those failure points and get rid of them. Okay. So let's do another question. So you think of this. So once again, see what takes time, and we'll talk about it. And this is kind of your process, by the way. You can go through questions and notice what's taking you time, and then tune that, right? Find a way to tune it. So let's do this one. Okay, we're pretty much cranking through this one. So let's talk about it a little bit. But before we do that, someone's asking, well, how do we know to go to the second paragraph, even though de Reclet is mentioned? We find the keywords in the first paragraph. Well, you need to know the one thing is you have that mental map of the passage, and what does the second paragraph do? You have to understand how the two paragraphs are related. Another thing I do is if I'm not finding what I need, for some reason in the keyword area, just start reading up or down. Go up a little bit, go down a little bit, go up a little bit, go down a little bit until you find it. In this case, we quickly, if we read down, we say in the 1980s, however, Bacher's contention began to be questioned. Very quickly see that, and then we start seeing, okay, maybe, and we start getting more into this, and we start seeing, okay, this is what's going on with this. So yeah, scan up or down. It's a key thing. Once again, yeah, for speed, you get to that keyword, you're not seeing the information, to quickly start to read up or down, scan the passage. And once again, if you understand and have a mental map of the passage, you're going to know I should look down, right? So this question, so what's the holdup of the primary purpose question for a lot of people? In this case, okay, the primary purpose of the passage. Well, first of all, what'll help us get this question correct quickly is understanding what the primary purpose means, right? It's not too complicated, but obviously the better we understand that, the faster we're going to be able to understand the question. Another thing that's going to help is understanding how to answer this type of question. For instance, if you know that you should look for key points in the passage to bring the primary purpose into focus, you're probably going to answer this question much quicker, right? So for instance, in the first sentence, we see that there's a debate here about whether scientists are warm or cold-blooded. And if you know how to answer primary purpose questions, you know often the first sentence is going to set you up for something key, right? Okay. And then you also know that conclusions, like what we have here of de Reclet, is our key as well, right? So you're going to focus on that. And finally, you may know, or not finally, another thing you may know actually is that contrasts are key as well. Bacher's contention began to be questioned. And then finally, if there's an author's conclusion at the end, and you know that those are important, well, here we have the author's sort of a conclusion. This question remains unanswered. If you know to do that, imagine how fast you're going to get through this question, right? And it's not the hardest primary purpose question ever. But if you know to do that, you're going to crank, you get it. Okay, so this is about a debate. Then we have someone's opinion that got to be questioned. And finally, the author saying the question remains unanswered. Okay, so which is the primary purpose? Discuss the influence on other scientists on Bacher's argument. It kind of does discuss the influence of other scientists, but it's not really on Bacher's argument, right? And it just mentions one scientist. And if we know about primary purpose questions, we know that that's too narrow anyway, right? We know about two narrow choices. So understanding how to answer each type of question is huge. If you know about two narrow choices going into the test, you're good. You get rid of that quickly. Same thing with B. It's a two narrow choice. Discuss recent evidence. Certainly does discuss recent evidence, but is that the primary purpose? No, it's too narrow, right? So that's out too. B is out. Disprove the contention that dinosaurs were warm-blooded. Well, if we went through these key points about the conclusion, we see that the author's conclusion is not that dinosaurs are warm-blooded, or he's not disproved. It says the question remains unanswered. So that's out. E, resolve a disagreement. Does it resolve the disagreement? Absolutely doesn't. We know that because we looked at that key point, and it never said that. And it says evaluate the claim. Yeah, there's our best answer. So we're going to get through these questions, and this goes for any type of RC question. The more you know a little bit about the traps, the question type, how the correct answer is meant to work, and all that stuff, the faster you're going to get through it just because you're prepared for that type of question. So whether you watch some videos, take a course, or look up, find somewhere some information on how to answer each type of question, I guarantee it's going to make you faster because you just know a little bit more going in, Okay. So yeah, so that's our next tip. Knowing how each type of reading comprehension question works and having strategies for handling each question type definitely can help, right? So if you're having trouble getting through it, if there's any type you haven't really thought about the strategy, you're not clear about the types of traps that show up, definitely do that. Once again, if you can shave off like 5 seconds on one primary purpose question, shave off 10 seconds, this is going to add up. You get to the end of the section, you're feeling a lot better. You're saving a minute per passage. It all adds up. Every little tweak is going to add up. Okay. Okay, now this one, we're going to do another question next. Now this next passage is a little complex. So one thing think about what kind of bogs you down in this next passage. But we're going to do another primary purpose question. And I don't know, for any of you who hadn't thought about it, looking at the key points of the passage or conclusions, the first sentence is a paragraph, the last sentence to get some main points to bring the primary purpose into focus. Think about doing that here. And also there's two narrow tracks where it's only talking about one little part of the passage. See how fast you can get through this question. And I'm going to interrupt. Use everything we're talking about, right? Try to use that mental map, the keywords, have everything kind of set up in your mind. And when you get to this question, think about the failure points, right? Look for those failure points. Does the passage actually say that? Does it do that? What's going on with these answer choices? Let's do another 15, 20 seconds on this one. Got a few answers. Anyone else? What do you think? It's a tricky question for sure. This is definitely a harder passage. Okay, let's talk about this. So, okay, as we said, for a primary purpose question, we can look at the key points in the passage. So here it starts off with diamonds are impossible to detect directly because they're so rare. That's interesting. Possible to detect directly because they're so rare. And then we have all this detail, right? Okay, so we could easily get bogged down in this detail, couldn't we? As magnet smashes through layers of rock and rips out debris, some of the debris brought up may come from a diamond stability field. I mean, do we have to understand all this? It's going to be tough, right? But we know where it mentions the magma and layers of rock, so we're not going to get hung up on these details. Okay, we're going to make a mental map, go through, and we're looking for okay, we're doing that as we're reading, and then we're looking for the main points because for a primary purpose here. So then we have this other main point. One can spend years searching for indicators and tracing them back to the pipes that are their sources. However, most kimberlite pipes found this way are barren of diamonds. Then it says, in the 1970s, the process was refined by focusing on difference between indicator minerals found in diamond-rich pipes and those found in barren pipes. Interesting. So we refined the process. And, I'm looking, it gives us a bunch of details. Look at these details. We could get so bogged down in these details, but we don't want to do that, okay? All this about ilmenite and chrome and oxygenation and everything, or oxidization, so much detail. So it'd be so easy to get bogged down, but really for the purpose of this primary purpose question, we don't need all that detail. We just have that they're almost impossible to detect directly. One can spend years searching for indicators, and then we have this process. And that's it. And everything else is basically is details, right? So let's go to A. Discuss an objection to Gurney's theories. There's no objection. So there's a failure point. That puppy's gone within seconds, right? A is out. Explore the formation of diamonds and the reason for their scarcity. It does do that, but does that, if we know about primary purpose questions, it has to capture the whole passage, not just part of it. And the second part doesn't really discuss that at all, right? Diamonds and the reasons for their scarcity. So B is out, okay? Analyze the importance of kimberlite pipes. It certainly mentions the importance of kimberlite pipes in the formation of diamonds. It's not really analyzing their importance. And by the way, that doesn't capture the second paragraph either. So if we know about answering primary purpose questions that they have to cover the entire passage, that's gone. Define the characteristics of indicator minerals. Okay, once again, we're trying to answer this quickly. We don't want to get smoked, but it looks pretty good. Define the characteristics of indicator minerals under different conditions. But is it really defining? Is that really what this passage is about? It says they're almost impossible to detect directly. And then we talk about these indicator minerals. But is it defining the characteristics under different conditions? Where are the different conditions in the first paragraph? See that? In the first paragraph, it's not there. We need to really, learn to find those failure points, right? I know we're trying to get through this fast, so we have to see the failure points. It's not talking about the indicator minerals in different conditions, except in a couple of spots, except in one spot. In the second paragraph, this example, iron took on more, iron took on more oxygen. I guess we could extend that to say that the indicator minerals are a little different if it includes diamonds or not. Fine, but is it really defining the characteristics? Is that the purpose of this passage? Maybe. Let's check E. Explain a method of determining whether kimberlite pipes are likely to contain diamonds. Now, how could E possibly be correct? Well, if we kind of think about this mental map of the passage, it shows us what's going on with these pipes, right? And then in the second paragraph, it presents this method, right? Now, it's funny, it's not in the first paragraph. It's in the second paragraph. And once again, with experience and understanding primary purpose questions, we know that it's not always the first paragraph that does that. I understand that you might not have known that. So there's one more thing we can pick up, that the primary purpose doesn't always start off in the first paragraph, okay? But we do see that it presents the context, right? It presents the context as how they're impossible to detect directly. And then it talks about the lack of profitability and tracing them back to their source, where they're too sparse to mine. So that's a setup. And sometimes we get that. And then it says in the 1970s, we had this whole other development where they found a better way to do it, right? And he explains that. So now, here's the thing. D is a very tempting choice, right? This defining the characteristics kind of does seem right, okay. But is that really the purpose of this passage, is just to define the characteristics of indicator minerals? No, it's not, okay? So it's a little tricky to eliminate, but it's just too specific. E works way better. We see the setup, and then it does explain the method. So once again, by finding the failure point, we get this correct. I realize this is a tricky question, but I wanted to show it to you, a little tougher question and a little tougher passage for a few reasons. And one of them is we don't want to get caught up in these details, right? As we're reading the passage, one of the things we want to do to get it through it quickly is realize we're probably not going to remember every little thing about, for instance, garnets, chromites, and ilmenites in this line. The standard ones are, what are the standard ones? I don't know. But if, we get the idea that there's these three things, and then precariat, we just want to get the idea. We can tell by these indicator minerals what's going on. We can always go back to the passage and find what we need using our mental map, right? Once again, this more or less oxygen in conditions, in response to conditions in kimberlitic magma, all this stuff down here in the last paragraph. It's so detailed, so much detail that we don't really need, Okay, so you get the idea. You don't have to memorize all this stuff. Don't get bogged down in it. Just get the idea and get through the passage, okay? So one thing we want to do when we're reading the passage, to get through it quickly, vary the level of attention we give to different types of information and avoid get bogged down in details, right? You don't have to have all these details. Don't get bogged down. I mean, definitely you want to understand. If you can read it, great. If you totally get it, great. But you don't get bogged down. Get the idea. You want to get through the passage quickly. For any very specific thing, like what are the standard ones, garnets, chromites, and ilmenites, if for any specific thing like that, we can always go back to the passage and find the standard ones, right? If we remember it said the standard ones, or what are there? Which are the minerals that matter? Right? We can go back and find that. You don't have to get bogged down in that, okay? So that's one thing. Vary the level of attention you give to different types of information. If you see a main point, read it carefully. If you see some details, get them as well as you can, but you don't have to. You're obviously not going to remember them all. You may not need them all. Don't go crazy on the details. Another thing that gets us through the passage faster is minimizing note-taking. A lot of people end up taking a lot of notes. One of the things I found, people come to me saying, man, I'm doing pretty well. My accuracy in RC is great, but man, am I slow, and I'm not finishing the verbal section on time. I'm just not getting my score. And a lot of the time what we find is they're taking a lot of notes. I personally don't take any notes in RC passages. I definitely don't take any notes in critical reasoning passages. You can take some minimal notes. Notice how rarely you go back to your notes. If you take notes about details, you're probably not going to use them. You're going to need a different detail from the one you took a note on. Your notes can confuse you. Minimize note taking. You want to get through this passage quickly. You don't have time for a lot of notes. Sometimes it's helpful to note the purpose of each paragraph. What happened in this paragraph, right? What's a key thing? What really jumps out at me? Fine, take a note on that, but don't go crazy with notes. Minimize it. And finally, just practice with many passages. Why? To increase your reading speed, okay? Especially if you don't do a lot of reading normally, and also to become familiar with their structures, because if you're used to seeing, like in this case, the case of this passage, we got a setup and then a presentation, right? Presenting context and then presenting the main point. You notice that type of thing. Or some of the passages present a person, they present the person's, what people said about that person, and then a conclusion. You get used to these. Or an experiment and then the results. You get used to these formats and you get through the passages faster. So the more passages we do, the faster we're going to get through passages because of familiarity. Okay. Now, another thing we saw here is the precision saves time. And we're going to see that in the next question as well. What do I mean? Well, we talked about failure points. Well, if you fully understand something precisely, you're going to get to the answer a lot more quickly than if you get it vaguely. Secondly, we can also read the question asked precisely. I can't tell you how many times I've seen someone struggling with a question. He said, oh my gosh, I blew off that one word in the question, and it took forever. I'm sitting there, well, so what are you thinking about this? And I still don't know. I'm sort of stuck between C, B, and A, And I say, that's interesting. Maybe you should reread the question stem. And then they immediately see the answer. Make sure you understand the question asked and read every word. And also carefully read the answer choices from beginning to end. You could be looking at two choices. They both look correct because you're not reading the last few words of one choice. Precision is huge, okay? It's huge. Read the entire answer choice. The better you get it, the more clearly, you're going to see exactly why one is correct and the other is not. If you're vague at all, This is such a theme in speed. Vagueness slows you down. So carefully read the answer choices from beginning to end. And as I said, don't skip words to save time. A word you skip could be key to answering the question quickly, right? So detail, it's funny. You would think, well, reading every word is going to slow me down. And didn't you just say to don't get bogged down in details? I sure did. But it's one thing to not get bogged down. It's another thing to skim, not read the words, not understand it at all. If you kind of like, oh man, this is a lot of details talking about Einstein, Niels Bohr, their theories. You're not going to remember it all, but you do want to read it all. Okay. I see a couple questions coming in. So for primary purpose, it needs to be in each paragraph. What about a 5-paragraph text? Should I just be the majority or actually in every single one? Thanks. I would say the majority, right? You don't have to capture, right? Yeah, if you get it, if it's the passage overall, and there are many paragraphs, clearly there could be a paragraph that says a little something that doesn't, this doesn't get captured by that, that's not directly in there, But yeah, it doesn't have to be in every paragraph. But the point is, if you see something in one paragraph that, like, oh, the analysis of the chemical signatures of, gases or something. Well, and it's only this one little spot. Is that the whole purpose of this thing? Does that take into account the context? Is it take into account the theory? Does it take into account people's opinions? It's got to take into account most of the stuff going on, right? So and in some way, and you have to justify it, right? So now in this one we did, the second paragraph clearly is more close to the primary purpose, but the first paragraph is related. It does set it up. It's not, if it just said it's showing that diamonds are impossible to detect directly, that wouldn't be the primary purpose. It really doesn't capture the second paragraph, but the first paragraph does sort of fit in the context of saying we're explaining a method. I am also confused about this. Does the best primary purpose pertain to the total content describing a particular area? Yeah. It really, ideally, it could focus on one paragraph or two, but it's going to somehow capture the entire flow of the passage. Is that clear? The whole passage is going to have some kind of flow to it. Like in this case, we have a setup and then presenting a method. We have a reason for the method and then a presentation of the method. So yeah, the primary purpose of the entire passage is going to somehow capture the flow of the entire passage. And, in this case, explore the formation of diamonds and the reasons for their scarcity. Really, really totally ignores the second paragraph, doesn't it? It doesn't capture at all what this is doing. Or choice B, analyze the importance of kimberlite pipes. It doesn't capture that second paragraph at all, right? So those are the easy outs. Or D, define the characteristics of indicator minerals under different conditions. It's interesting. Define the characteristics. Think about that. Is that really all this passage is doing? Is define the characteristics. So even though it kind of shows up throughout the passage, even that isn't quite the primary purpose because it ignores the difficulty of directly finding them, right? It talks about this difficulty. Is that defining the characteristics of indicator minerals? Nah. Right? So, you start to get the idea, wait a minute, what are these main points? Searching for indicators and tracing them back? Is that defining the characteristics? No. So we can see that that's really too narrow. Okay, so now we talked about precision, right? So let's do another question. This is I ended up with a hard one. This one we really need to be super precise, right? And once again, we're going to go through this passage. Don't get bogged down in the details, except now, I said don't get bogged down in the details, but that doesn't mean that when you go back and look for information, it's a little different, okay? Let's think about this passage. When we go back here, if we're looking for information about oxidization of diamonds in the end of the second paragraph, right? We're going to read that like a critical reasoning question. You want to very clearly read what you go back and find. So that's different from the first time when maybe you're kind of like, look, these details are overwhelming. I'm just going to get through this and not get bogged down. It's a whole other thing when you go back to find the details. You want to be super precise. What does it say? Okay, so let's be super precise in this passage and see whether we can get this tricky question correct. 2 more seconds on this one for any other answers you might have. Okay, let's think about it. So the question is, the passage suggests this is an inference question. It's something in critical reasoning, if you know, the inference questions a lot of time are must be truths. In reading comp, they're a little vaguer, or a little, we don't have that quite the must be true where the passage suggests. It's more of like, what can we conclude from the passage? So let's see what we can conclude. We know if we have our mental map that G10 garnets are mentioned here in the second paragraph, right? And it indicates what? Okay, so let's work from answer choice A. A large percentage of material in the pipe which the garnet is found is likely to be made up of diamonds. Okay, so let's see what it says about G10 garnets. They say a large percentage. For example, G10 garnets typically found in diamond-rich pipes are lower in calcium and higher in chrome than garnets from barren pipes. So these garnets formed only in the diamond stability field. More common versions came from elsewhere, right? So that implies that there's diamonds where there's G10 garnets, right? So the question is, if we understand the passage, as we were talking about, a large percentage of the material in the pipe in which the garnet is found, well, if we understand the passage, we can quickly eliminate this choice. Why? Because it says in the first paragraph that diamonds are almost impossible to detect directly because they are so rare. Rich kimberlite pipes contain only 3 carats per ton of kimberlite, so it's not a high percentage. A is therefore long out. Where's my... Okay. B, the levels of calcium in the chrome or pipe are conducive to diamond formation. We look at where it says calcium and chrome. Does it say they're conducive in paragraph 2? No, it certainly doesn't. There's our failure point. It doesn't say it's conducive to formation of diamonds. The pipe passed through a diamond stability field and thus may contain diamonds. That sounds kind of correct. I don't see a failure point there. Let's check D. Any diamonds the pipe contains would not have come from the diamond stability field. Well, it says that they were probably formed in a diamond stability field, right? So that D is contradictory. That's our easy out. There's our failure point. It is unlikely that the pipe's temperature was so high that oxidized any diamonds the pipe may have contained. Well, we do see this whole thing in paragraph 2 about oxidization. But if we're being precise and not just reading just too quickly here, we see that this is about something else. It's about ilmenites or ilmenite, right? It's when it's being highly oxidized. So it's not about the garnet. So if we're being precise, we totally understand that E is out for that reason. Okay. So yeah, the answer to this one that you quickly got, a lot of you, is C, right? So precision gets us a long way. The mental map gets us a long way. We do it quickly, and we totally get the passage. If you understand what you're reading, okay, all these things add up to speed, and you're going to get through reading comp fast. Okay, now there's one other thing we can talk about here, and that is mindset, right? Because mindset really affects speed. And maybe you've experienced this. You get nervous about the test, and suddenly you're rereading, and you're going crazy. You don't see what's correct. All the answer choices look the same. So calm is really key. The more calm you can be, the faster you're going to get through the passages. And I don't mean, you're zoning out. It's the difference between being calm and zoning out. We're going to, as we see in the last point here, we're going to learn to maintain a state of relaxed intensity, which is different from just being, too relaxed. We're calm but intense, okay? And you can do this in life too. You can get used, you can practice for the GMAT. I do it all the time. I practice GMAT stuff in real life. If I notice in myself making careless errors in real life, I'm like, this is what I'm going to do in the test too. I try to do everything accurately. So we can look to be calm in all kinds of situations and learn to be a calm Zen person who isn't easily shaken. And then it can pay off in being calm. Another thing is to learn to respond to issues in positive ways. I find that when people are getting slowed down, a lot of the time it turns out that they're getting angry. They're angry at themselves. They're angry at the question. They're angry at the test. Well, guess what? If you're angry, you're not operating as quickly. I mean, you can imagine 2 people in an office working together. If they're angry at each other all the time, communication is going to break down. Everything takes forever because everything becomes an issue, right? Don't make everything an issue for yourself. Don't get angry. Handle things in positive ways, including your response. Oh, if you don't get a passage, handle it in a positive way. Have positive internal messaging. Say, I can get this. Don't say this passage is terrible. Say, I can get this. I'm good at this. This passage is interesting. It's probably interesting to somebody, even though it's not a topic I'm particularly curious about. Okay, use positive internal messaging rather than negativity and anger. And I'm telling you, it'll speed you up. Okay, I can't tell you how many people I've worked with in coaching that when we actually deal with emotional stuff, they get faster. So, you know, and we've talked about learning to maintain a state of relaxed intensity. And we also talked about the mindset in general. Just having that positive mindset, helping understand the passage and realizing what it takes to get it done, and being very determined is so key. Just plain being determined to get it done. When you don't understand something, you're having a hard time, or you don't feel like being careful, being super determined to get that right answer can make a huge difference. So, okay, with all that in mind, how are we going to develop this, right? Well, we have to practice effectively. And you know the funny thing, practicing untimed is really key. Practice untimed. That's how you're going to learn to do these things. That's how you're going to learn to be precise, okay? And achieve high accuracy. Because by the way, a lot of people that say, well, I'm having trouble, you know, I'm not getting through the verbal section on time. It turns out they're only getting 60, 70% of the questions correct on time. If you're only getting 70% correct on time, and I know 70 sounds pretty good, but if you're missing 30% of questions on time, that means there are a lot of gaps left in your skill set. You should be at least at 80%, 85, preferably 90% when you're doing questions on time. Maybe even 15 correct in a row a lot of the time when you're doing them on time. And then I tell you what, if you have the skills to get them correct, and notice precision is a skill it takes to get it correct, having the mental map, using the failure points, all these things add up to accuracy. If your accuracy is good, 90% of the time, your speed is going to be pretty good too. And then you can do some of these tweaks we were talking about, but get your accuracy up first. If you're having trouble with verbal speed, increase your verbal accuracy. That's going to take care of a lot. And then after that, to achieve high accuracy, practice with a timer or a stopwatch. Use a GMAT club timer and incrementally reduce time per question. Notice that this is different from just trying to do questions in 2 minutes each, which does have a place. It does have a place. But it's better to work your way down and do what we did here, right? Go through a question, see what took you time, analyze that, and say, how can I tweak this to save 5 seconds? How can I tweak it to save 15 seconds? And save 5, 10, 15, 30 seconds at a time and get it down to 2 minutes, right? Then you're really there, right? You're not just doing it fast. You're not just pushing yourself, although even pushing yourself has a place, but you're not just pushing yourself. You've done all these tweaks. You have methods for answering the questions. You're better at making a mental map. You're better at understanding the passage, and you're reducing the time, 10, 15 seconds at a time. Now you're looking good, right? So that's how you can develop speed with effective practice. I see a couple questions coming in. Let's see what's going on. Okay. Okay, so you get the idea, right? This is how you're going to do it. So now you have a roadmap. I hope you have some tweaks we can make, right? So we started off talking about understanding the passages. We moved on to making a mental map, looking for failure points, precision, and also just knowing how to answer the questions, having strategies for the questions. I hope that was useful, y'all. It was a really good time for me. Appreciate your coming out. Love talking about this stuff. And if you have any questions, you can always hit me with an email or hit me with a DM on GMAT Club, and I'd be happy to help. Take care.